October 12, 1858, Pointe Coupee Parish, Louisiana. Coroner's intake log, entry number 407. Subject Gideon Blackwood. Race white. Sex male. Age 55. Condition of remains upon arrival. Rigor mortis is absent. Core body temperature is consistent with biological cessation, occurring less than 60 minutes prior to discovery. Notes on the environment. The room is a study, approximately 20 feet by 20 feet. The door is constructed of solid oak and was bolted from the inside. The windows are shuttered and latched. The air in the room is stagnant. It carries a heavy oxidation profile, the sharp, sugary scent of spilled brandy reacting with the humid Louisiana air, layered over the stale, carbonized smell of pipe tobacco. But the physiological anomalies of the deceased are disturbing. I want you to look closely at the image on your screen. Imagine looking down at a man who died not in peace, but in a state of catastrophic biological panic. The hands of the deceased are not relaxed. They are contracted into rigid claws, deeply embedded in the fibers of the expensive Persian rug. The friction burns found under the fingernails suggest he was not being pulled away by an assailant. Rather, he was attempting to crawl. He was dragging his own failing body across the floor toward something. And then there are the eyes. There is hemorrhaging in the sclera. The whites of the eyes are mapped with broken blood vessels. The pupils are dilated to the very rim of the iris. This is not the facial presentation of a cerebral apoplexy or a stroke, as the local plantation physician has so conveniently claimed. This is the physiological imprint of absolute predatory terror. A heart stopped not by biology, but by a sudden, devastating realization. There is no weapon in the room. There is no poison in the glass. There is no second exit. However, there is one other occupant in this sealed room. A 19-year-old female, enslaved. She is sitting on a velvet stool in the corner, approximately 10 feet from the body. Her hands are folded in her lap. Her posture is serene. When the door was broken down, she did not scream. She did not recoil. She simply sat there amidst the smell of death and brandy. The overseer claims she is a nonentity in this investigation. He claims she is incapable of witnessing the crime. The parish records state that the subject, Adelein, has been stone blind for 13 years. But when I look at the twisted horror on the face of the corpse, and then at the placid, almost statue-like stillness of the girl, I am forced to note one detail in the logbook that defies medical explanation. The angle of her chin. She is not tilted toward the sound of the door. She is not tilted toward the floor. Her face is angled directly at the body, as if she is watching it cool. Welcome to Case File, Cypress Hollow. To understand the death of Gideon Blackwood, we must first understand the silence. In a modern video, we would use sound effects to set the scene: thunder, rain, the creaking of floorboards. But I want you to strip all of that away. I want you to imagine a silence so heavy it presses against your eardrums. Cypress Hollow Plantation was a place built on the suppression of sound. It sat isolated on the edge of the False River, surrounded by water that barely moved, thick with algae and secrets. The main house was a brooding Gothic revival structure, a monster of red brick and white columns that seemed to frown at visitors. Julian Vance, the parish coroner, was a man of statutes and logic. He did not believe in ghosts and he did not believe in monsters. He believed in cause and effect. But as he stood in that study, looking at the dead man and the blind girl, his logic began to fray. The overseer, a man named Silas Grubb, had laughed when Vance asked why the girl hadn't summoned help. It was a harsh, barking sound that violated the quiet of the death room. "She didn't know he was dead, sir," Grubb had said, wiping sweat from his neck. "Or if she did, she couldn't see to get to the door to unlock it." "Why not?" Vance asked. "Because Adelein," the overseer replied, "has been blind since she was a child. She's the master's blind pet." He keeps her in here to listen to him read. She ain't seen a thing in 13 years. Vance looked at Adelein. She was small, delicate. She wore a house servant's dress, clean and pressed. Her hands, resting on the velvet of the stool, were smooth. These were not the hands of a field worker. They were the hands of someone who existed to be decorative, to be furniture. Adelein, Vance said. She did not flinch. She did not turn her head quickly. She moved with the slow, deliberate caution of the sightless. She tilted her ear toward his voice. Yes, sir. Her voice was low, melodic, and terrifyingly calm. Did you hear your master die? I heard him fall, sir, she said. I heard him make a wet sound in his throat, and I heard him scratching. Scratching. His fingernails, she whispered, on the floor. He was scratching at the wood for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. Let that image settle in your mind. A man, a powerful, wealthy tyrant, lying on the floor of his own study, his heart failing, his lungs gasping for air, his fingers clawing at the expensive rug, trying to pull himself an inch at a time. And 10 feet away, a young woman sits perfectly still, listening to the sound of his fingernails on the wood. Why didn't you help him? Vance asked. The question hung in the air. Adelein finally turned her face fully toward him. Her eyes were covered by a milky film, the result of some terrible trauma. They wandered independently, never focusing on his face, staring instead at a point over his left shoulder. Help him? She asked, as if the concept were foreign to her. Master Gideon always said I was useless for anything but sitting still. He told me never to move unless he gave me permission. He did not give me permission to move, sir. It was a defense Vance had heard before, the weaponized obedience of the enslaved, a literal interpretation of a command used to mask a moment of resistance. But this felt different. This wasn't resistance. This felt like execution. Vance ordered the body removed. The men struggled with the weight of Gideon Blackwood, maneuvering his stiffening limbs through the door. Adelein did not shift her weight. She did not pull her legs back to let them pass. She sat like a stone idol in a temple that had just collapsed. As Vance prepared to leave the room, he stopped. He looked back at her one last time. He died in terror, Adelein, Vance said. His face, he looked like he saw a demon. Adelein smiled. It was a small, private twitch of the lips. Perhaps he did, sir, she said. They say the guilty see all their sins before they go. Julian Vance was a man who trusted paper more than people. People lied. People forgot, but ledgers were the confessionals of the wealthy. He decided to stay at Cypress Hollow. He told the overseer it was to finalize the paperwork, but in truth, he was hunting. He needed to understand the dynamic of this house. He needed to understand the history of the man who had died scratching at his own floorboards. He spent the next afternoon in the study, the same room where Blackwood had died. The smell of brandy had faded, replaced by the musty scent of old paper. Vance opened the plantation ledgers. Blackwood had been meticulous. He recorded everything: crop yields, tool inventories, the purchase of livestock, and the purchase of human beings. Vance turned the pages back, hunting for the year 1845. The year Adelein would have been 6 years old. The year the darkness supposedly took her. He found the entry on a page dated November 14, 1845. The ink was brown, faded, but the handwriting was sharp and jagged. Purchase Adelein, age 6, mulatto, mother deceased, price $400. There was no mention of blindness. In fact, a later note in January 1846 read, "Girl is sharp-eyed, caught stealing sugar, punished, smart, too smart." Vance frowned. He ran his finger down the column of numbers and notes. He flipped forward to June 1846, and there it was, the entry that made his stomach turn. Adelein persists in watching, unsettling behavior, stares, corrective measures taken. Doctor says vision may not recover. Good. A blind observer is a silent one. Vance stared at the words, corrective measures. The implication was monstrous. Gideon Blackwood hadn't bought a blind child. He hadn't inherited a child with a disease. He had manufactured a blind child. He had caused an injury, likely a chemical or thermal burn, because he didn't like the way a 6-year-old girl looked at him. He had blinded her to make her safe, to turn her into an object that could hear his secrets but never witness his sins. Vance closed the ledger. His hands were shaking. He needed a medical opinion. He found Dr. Alden Cross, the plantation physician, in the library. Cross was an aging man with trembling hands and a nose that mapped a lifetime of heavy drinking. "Dr. Cross," Vance said, slamming the ledger onto the table, "you treated Adelein when she was a child, when she lost her sight." Cross spilled a drop of sherry on his waistcoat. He looked up, his eyes watery and evasive. "That was a long time ago, Mr. Vance. Ancient history." "What happened to her?" "An accident," Cross muttered, looking at the door as if planning an escape. "Chemical burn. Lye, I believe, from the soap making. Tragically careless." "The ledger says Blackwood took corrective measures because she was watching him." Cross paled. The glass in his hand rattled against the table. Gideon Blackwood was a hard man, you know how it is. He valued privacy. He didn't like to be judged, even by a child. "Did he blind her intentionally, doctor?" "I didn't ask," Cross whispered. "I just treated the burns, the lye. It eats the cornea. It melts the clear tissue into scar. I did what I could. But the eyes clouded over. She never saw again." "Are you certain?" Vance pressed. "Are you absolutely certain?" Cross looked at him sharply. "Of course I'm certain. The scarring is total. She acts blind. She walks blind. She's as blind as a bat in a cave." "Then why," Vance asked, leaning in, "did she know exactly where the body was lying when we entered the room?" Her head was tilted toward him, not toward the sound of his breathing. He had stopped breathing. She was tilted toward the sight of him. Cross shrugged, dismissing the impossible. "Hearing, smell. The blind develop other senses. They sense the displacement of air. You are imagining things, Mr. Vance." But Vance was not imagining things. He was a scientist. And science told him that a woman who has been blind for 13 years does not smile at a corpse unless she knows exactly what it looks like. That night the heat was oppressive. The house creaked like a dying ship. Around 2:00 a.m., Vance rose and walked out onto the second-floor gallery. The moonlight washed the plantation in silver and shadow. He looked down toward the kitchen house, where Adelein was being kept. A figure was moving in the yard. It was her. I want you to visualize this clearly. The courtyard is uneven, filled with tree roots, loose stones, buckets, and debris. A minefield for the sightless. Adelein was walking across it. She did not have a cane. She did not have her hands out in front of her to feel for obstacles. She moved with a fluid, confident grace. She stepped over a fallen branch without pausing. She navigated around the brick well without trailing her hand against it. She walked straight to the edge of the woods, knelt, and dug something up from the loose earth at the base of a massive oak tree. She held the object up to the moonlight. It glittered, a small glass vial. She inspected it. She turned it in her hand, watching the light catch the glass. Then she stood, tucked the vial into her dress, and walked back to the kitchen house, disappearing inside. Vance gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. A blind woman walking without a cane. A blind woman finding a specific spot in the dirt. A blind woman inspecting an object in the moonlight. She wasn't blind, or at least she wasn't blind enough. The next morning, Vance did not interrogate her in the kitchen. He brought her back to the study, to the scene of the crime. He dismissed the overseer. He locked the heavy oak door, just as Blackwood had done on the night of his death. Adelein sat on the same velvet stool. Her hands were folded. Her milky eyes stared past him, vacant and empty. "You can see me, can't you, Adelein?" Vance said quietly. She did not move. I don't know what you mean, sir. I saw you last night in the yard. You walked without a cane, you dug up a vial, you looked at it. Adelein went very still. The vacant expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to suck tight, like the moment before a thunderclap. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice dropping an octave. The subservient lilt was gone. You are a man of the law, you trust your books and your evidence, but you don't understand survival. Drop the act, Adelein, look at me. Slowly, terrifyingly, her eyes shifted. The milky film was there, yes. The scars from the lie were real, but behind the clouds something focused. She tilted her head, peering through the periphery of her vision, finding him. It wasn't a clear gaze, but it was a seeing one, a predator locating its prey. I see shadows, she whispered. I see shapes, light and dark, movement. If I hold my head just right, I can see enough. You faked it, Vance breathed, for 13 years. He burned my eyes because I saw him hurt his wife, Adelein said. I was 6, I screamed. He didn't like that. He put the lie in my eyes to teach me not to look. He thought he took it all, but he left me a sliver, a tiny corner of light in the left eye, a fragment of vision in the right. And you let him believe you were totally blind. If he knew I could see, he would have finished the job, she said simply, or killed me. So I learned to be blind, I learned to stumble, I learned to stare at nothing, I learned to be the furniture. Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He realized the magnitude of the deception. And because he thought you were blind, Vance realized, he let you stay. He let you sit in this room while he did everything. Everything, she confirmed. I sat here while he cheated his partners. I sat here while he beat men to death in the yard and came in to drink brandy to calm his nerves. I sat here 7 years ago while he argued with his wife, Clara. I sat here when he came back from the roof that night, breathing hard, muttering that she slipped. I was the safe place, the repository of secrets, because who would believe the blind girl, and how could she testify to what she couldn't see? But the night he died, Vance said, what happened? Adelein's face hardened. A look of profound, ancient hatred surfaced. It was a look that had been gestating in the dark for a decade. He was drinking, he was scared, he'd been losing money. He started talking to me or at me, confessing. He told me about Clara, he admitted he pushed her from the widow's walk. He laughed about it, said she was weak. And then he asked for his medicine. He had a heart tonic, digitalis. He kept it in the drawer. Vance looked at the desk. The vial you dug up last night. He told me to bring it to him, she continued. He was feeling an attack coming on. The fear was eating him. In his drunkenness, he forgot. He forgot I was supposed to be helpless. He ordered me to fetch it. So you fetched it. I did. I walked to the desk. I opened the drawer. I took out the bottle. And you gave it to him. No, Adelein said softly. I stood there holding it and I looked at him. I looked him straight in the eye, Mr. Vance. For the first time in 13 years, I dropped the mask. I let my eyes focus. I let him see that I could see him. Vance imagined the scene. The drunk, terrified tyrant on the floor clutching his chest. The blind girl standing over him, holding his salvation in her hand, staring down at him with eyes that suddenly, impossibly, locked onto his. What did he do? He screamed, Adelein said. He realized I had been watching him for 13 years, every sin, every crime. He realized there were no secrets, the shock. It stopped his heart. He tried to crawl to me. He tried to beg, but he couldn't breathe. You watched him die, Vance said. You could have saved him. I didn't touch him, Adelein said calmly. I didn't poison him, I didn't strike him. I simply looked at him. Is it a crime, Mr. Vance, to look at your master? She paused, then leaned forward, her voice a whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The vial in the yard wasn't the medicine. It was the poison he used on the rats. I swapped them out 3 days ago, just in case, but I didn't need to use it. I didn't need to pour a drop. His own fear killed him. I just let it happen. Vance sat back stunned. It was the perfect murder. No weapon, no poison administered, just a look, a revelation of truth that was so terrifying it stopped a man's heart. "Why tell me?" Vance asked. "You could have kept this secret forever. You could have played the blind girl until they sold you." "Because you found the locked door," she said, "and because you aren't like him. You looked at me and saw a person. He only ever saw a thing. And I am tired, Mr. Vance. I am so tired of the dark." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "What will you do, Mr. Vance? Will you hang me for having eyes?" Julian Vance looked at the ledger on the desk. Corrective measures. He looked at the scars on Adelein's face. He thought of the justice of the law, which would demand she be punished for the crime of omission. And he thought of the justice of God, which perhaps had already been served on that Persian rug. He picked up the death certificate he had prepared. Cause of death, natural causes, cerebral apoplexy. He looked at Adelein. She was watching him, truly watching him. He uncapped his pen. He signed the document. "You're right, Adelein," Vance said, not looking at her. "He died of a stroke, a tragedy. His heart simply gave out." He stood up and gathered his papers. "I suggest you maintain your condition, at least until the estate is settled. A blind woman is less likely to be sold to the cane fields. A blind woman is invisible." "I understand," she said. And then, right before his eyes, she vanished. Not physically, but the person, the sharp, intelligent, dangerous woman, receded. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes drifted apart, becoming milky and unfocused. Her chin dropped. The furniture returned. "Goodbye, Mr. Vance." "Goodbye, Adelein." Vance left Cypress Hollow that afternoon. He never returned. The estate of Gideon Blackwood was dissolved. The slaves were sold. Adelein, listed in the inventory as house wench, blind, of little value, was purchased for a pittance by a seamstress in New Orleans who wanted someone to sort fabrics by touch. Vance followed her trail years later, after the Civil War had washed the slate clean. He found her name in the 1870 census, living in a free community in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans. She was listed as Adelein Blackwood. Occupation: teacher. He visited the schoolhouse one afternoon in 1872. He didn't go in. He stood by the window and watched. Adelein was sitting at the front of the room, reading to a group of children. She was reading from a book with small print, holding it at a normal distance. She wore spectacles, but her eyes moved across the page with ease. She paused, looked up, and scanned the room, her gaze sharp, intelligent, and commanding. She saw him at the window. He was sure of it. She paused for a fraction of a second, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. Then she went back to reading. Adelein lived until 1904. She never married, but she raised 3 generations of students, teaching them to read, teaching them to write, teaching them to see the world clearly. She never spoke of Gideon Blackwood or the night he died. She didn't have to. She had taken his power simply by witnessing it. The story of the blind girl of Cypress Hollow challenges our understanding of resistance. We often look for rebellion in acts of violence, in runaways, in armed uprisings. But sometimes, resistance is silence. Sometimes, it is the patience to wait 13 years for the right moment. Sometimes, it is the terrifying power of simply seeing the truth when everyone expects you to be blind. Gideon Blackwood died because he could not bear the weight of being known. He died because the furniture developed eyes. What would you have done in Vance's shoes? Would you have reported her, or would you have signed the paper and walked away? History is filled with witnesses we assumed were blind. Perhaps it is time we started wondering what they actually saw. I want you to leave a comment below. Was this justice, or was it murder? Let us know. And if this story chilled you to the bone, subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Until next time, remember, the truth is always watching, even when you think no one can see.